The night was thick with fog, the kind that seemed to swallow up entire roads and leave only the faintest glimmers of distant headlights. Daniel adjusted his grip on the steering wheel, the static-filled radio murmuring low as his car cut through the endless stretch of backwoods highway. He hadn't meant to drive this late, but deadlines had forced him to leave town after dark. Now, every passing mile sign felt like a warning: fewer lights, fewer homes, fewer signs of life. The sense of isolation pressed heavier with each turn of the tires. An old gas station appeared on the side of the road, its sign half-lit, buzzing like an insect about to die. Relief washed through him, until he pulled in and realized the lot was completely empty, not even a clerk in sight. The pumps were old, chipped, and their digital screens looked permanently cracked. He hesitated before stepping out, the night colder than it should have been for early autumn. He thought about leaving immediately, but the low fuel gauge on his dashboard forced him to linger. Somewhere beyond the fog, he swore he heard a faint whistle, shrill and deliberate, like someone mocking him from the dark. Inside the gas station, the fluorescent lights flickered, revealing aisles of dust-covered snacks and expired sodas. The register sat unattended, and behind the counter, a door was left ajar, spilling only blackness. "Hello?" Daniel called, his voice echoing against cracked tiles. No response. He set a 20 on the counter, filled his tank, and told himself that was enough. He didn't want to wait for whoever worked here to come shuffling out of the shadows. But when he climbed back into his car and turned the key, the engine coughed, sputtered, and died. Panic began to gnaw at him. He tried again, nothing. He checked his phone, but there was no signal, not even a bar. The world outside his windshield looked emptier now, as though the fog had thickened while he wasn't looking. Then came the sound again, that sharp, mocking whistle. It was closer this time. He froze, hand hovering over the ignition. Something was in the lot with him, though he could see no one in the fog. He locked the doors, his breath fogging up the glass, and waited, hoping it was just nerves, just imagination, but imagination doesn't rattle the back passenger door. Imagination doesn't drag slow fingernails across glass. Daniel's heart thundered as he twisted around in his seat, seeing only the pale outline of a hand vanish back into the fog. He swallowed hard, pulse racing, and whispered to himself that it had to be a prank. But deep down, he knew better. There was no one else out here, no reason for anyone to be. And yet, he wasn't alone. Daniel's hands trembled on the steering wheel, though his car sat lifeless and silent. He leaned forward, trying to peer into the fog, every muscle strung tight with dread. The sound of the whistle returned, rising and falling with deliberate rhythm, like a tune only the whistler understood. It wasn't random, it was purposeful, almost playful. Whoever was out there knew he was watching, knew he was trapped. He lowered his window a crack, straining to listen, but the moment the whistle cut off, the silence became even worse. Gathering what courage he could, Daniel reached for the door handle and stepped out, the crunch of gravel beneath his shoes loud in the stillness. The cold air bit against his skin, making him shiver. "Hello?" he called, his voice carrying too far into the fog. His words came back to him in echoes, thin and mocking. He stood perfectly still, listening. Then, far to his left, the whistle returned. It was closer now. Slow. Taunting. He spun in the direction of the sound, but the fog revealed nothing, just swirling gray that seemed to move like breath. He backed toward the car, heart hammering, when his headlights flickered, though he hadn't touched the switch. The beams cut into the fog for a brief second, revealing the faintest outline of a figure standing at the edge of the lot. Tall, motionless, head tilted at an unnatural angle. The light dimmed again, and the figure was gone. Daniel staggered backward, hitting the hood of his car, his throat tight with terror. Was it real? Or was the fog and fear playing tricks on him? He clung to the rational thought that people sometimes camped or lived off these forgotten highways. Maybe it was just someone messing with him. His rational side faltered when he noticed something pressed against the driver's side window. A handprint. Not one he had left, it was too high, too smeared, almost as if whoever left it had dragged their palm down the glass while watching him inside. He hadn't heard the car move, hadn't seen anyone approach. Yet the mark was fresh, gleaming faintly in the weak glow of the overhead lights. He forced himself not to scream, but his body shook with the urge to run, though there was nowhere to run to. Then, through the fog, a low chuckle broke the silence. It wasn't loud, but it was enough to freeze Daniel in place. A man's laugh, raspy, uneven, like someone struggling to hold it back. Daniel turned slowly, searching, his vision darting across shadows that stretched and warped with every flicker of light. The laugh stopped, replaced by that same haunting whistle. And in that moment, Daniel realized something terrifying: the sound wasn't moving around him. It was circling him. Daniel climbed back into his car, slamming the door shut and locking it with shaky hands. His chest rose and fell in uneven bursts, every nerve on edge. He pressed the key into the ignition again, nothing. Not even the click of a starter trying to catch. It was as if the car itself had died in fear, refusing to help him. He tried the horn out of desperation, but the sound came out broken, weak, like a dying animal. The silence that followed was crushing, the kind of silence that made you feel like you were being watched from all sides at once. The whistle cut through again, impossibly close this time, so close it sounded as though it came from inside the car. Daniel spun around in his seat, his eyes darting from the back seats to the floorboards. Nothing. Just emptiness. He pressed his palm against his forehead, whispering, "You're losing it, just tired, just stressed," but before he could finish convincing himself, a single, deliberate knock echoed against the glass of his passenger side window. 1. 2. 3. His breath caught, his entire body frozen in place. Slowly, he turned his head, and there it was, a pale face in the fogged-up glass. No details, just the ghostly impression of someone leaning against the window, their head cocked sideways, lips curled into what might have been a grin. Daniel scrambled back against the driver's side door, fumbling for his phone again, though he already knew there'd be no signal. The face lingered for a few long, unbearable seconds before melting back into the fog, as if it had never been there at all. The whistle started again, this time accompanied by faint footsteps crunching across gravel. Whoever it was, they weren't in a hurry. They wanted him to hear. Wanted him to know that he wasn't going anywhere. Daniel reached down under his seat, his fingers brushing against the cold steel of the tire iron he kept there. It wasn't much, but it was something to hold on to in the oppressive void of the night. He gripped it tight, the weight grounding him, though his heart felt like it was breaking apart in his chest. Then the gas station lights above him flickered once, twice, and went out completely, plunging the lot into darkness. Only his weak headlights remained, beams slicing through the fog. And in that trembling cone of light, Daniel saw them again, the figure. Closer this time. Standing directly in the center of the lot, head still tilted, arms hanging too loosely at their sides. Watching. Waiting. The whistle grew louder. Daniel tightened his grip on the tire iron until his knuckles ached. His breath fogged up the windshield, blurring his view of the motionless figure standing in the cone of light. He blinked, praying it would vanish the way it had before. But this time, it stayed. The tilted head, the loose arms, the weight of its silent attention pressed down on him like a stone. Then, as if responding to his growing dread, the figure began to walk. Not fast. Not slow. Just steady, measured steps across the gravel toward his car. The whistle returned, but now it was broken, uneven, as if the figure's lungs couldn't quite keep pace with its feet. Each note rattled, ending in a faint wheeze that made Daniel's stomach twist. He swallowed hard, his throat dry, his pulse screaming against his ears. Should he run? Should he stay locked inside the car? His hand fumbled at the ignition one last time, desperate. The engine refused to stir, only coughing uselessly before dying completely. Daniel cursed under his breath, slamming his fist against the wheel. The figure came close enough now that the fog no longer swallowed it whole. The details emerged in fragments: long, disheveled hair hanging limp over its face, clothing dark and damp, and hands that seemed wrong somehow, too long, too sharp at the fingers. Daniel raised the tire iron, his chest heaving, and shouted, "Stay back." His voice cracked in the cold night, swallowed quickly by the fog. The figure stopped dead in its tracks, tilting its head further, almost impossibly sideways, as if curious about him. For a brief second, Daniel thought it was over, that maybe his voice had been enough to scare it off. But then came the sound, the unmistakable scrape of fingernails against metal. His car door rattled violently, the handle twitching as though invisible hands were jerking at it from outside. Daniel spun, staring at the locked passenger side door, and saw the knob pulling, jerking, trying to give way. A shiver crawled down his spine as the glass trembled with each attempt. He screamed and swung the tire iron at the window, hitting nothing, just the cold echo of his own panic filling the car. The rattling stopped. Silence. He panted hard, sweat breaking on his forehead despite the chill. For a long, crushing moment, nothing moved. Then, without warning, the rear windshield fogged over. Slowly, deliberately, a single word was scrawled into the condensation from the outside. Daniel's heart froze as he read it in jagged letters, "Run." Daniel stared at the jagged word on the windshield, his chest tight with confusion and terror. Run. His first instinct was to cling to the false safety of the car, but the longer he sat there, the more the message seemed less like a threat and more like a warning. Whoever, or whatever, was out there wasn't just playing with him. They wanted him gone. He swallowed hard, realizing he couldn't sit and wait for the figure to tear its way inside. With trembling hands, he unlocked the driver's side door. The night air hit him like ice as he stepped out, tire iron clutched tight. The fog pressed against his skin, swallowing the world outside the faint glow of his headlights. He forced himself not to look back at the car, though every instinct screamed to retreat. Somewhere in the mist, the whistle started again, so faint it was almost playful, though the sound echoed in a way that made it impossible to tell how far away it was. He chose a direction blindly, stumbling toward the dark tree line beyond the gas station lot. Gravel turned to dirt beneath his shoes, then to damp grass as he pushed deeper into the fog. His breath came in ragged bursts, every step a fight against the voice in his head begging him to turn back. The trees loomed tall, skeletal outlines stretching overhead, branches clattering softly in the wind. It felt wrong here, unnaturally quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you wonder what's holding its breath. He tried to keep moving, but every few feet, he swore he heard footsteps echoing his own. Then came the first break in the fog, a small clearing, faintly lit by the sickly glow of a lantern hanging from a crooked tree branch. The light swayed, casting uneven shadows across the ground, and beneath it sat something that made Daniel's blood run cold, an old wooden chair, empty, but facing directly toward him. He froze, realizing too late that stepping into the clearing felt like stepping onto a stage, and whoever had set this up was waiting for the show to begin. The whistle returned, louder now, and this time it was accompanied by something new, a low, rasping voice from the darkness just beyond the lantern's glow. "You shouldn't have come out," Daniel spun wildly, raising the tire iron, but the voice had no body, no clear direction. It was everywhere at once, tangled in the fog. His knees threatened to buckle, the weight of dread pulling him down. Yet deep inside, a worse truth gnawed at him. Whatever had written that warning on his windshield might not have been the same thing that was waiting for him here. Daniel kept his distance from the chair, every instinct screaming that it was a lure. The lantern's glow painted it in sickly amber, its cracked wood and crooked legs casting jagged shadows across the dirt. He circled the edge of the clearing, his tire iron gripped so tightly it hurt, but no matter which way he turned, his eyes kept flicking back to the chair, as if daring him to sit, as if silently demanding it. The voice that had warned him earlier was gone, replaced by the steady creak of the lantern swaying overhead. He edged closer, just enough to notice something etched into the seat of the chair. Letters, carved deeply into the wood. He squinted, his throat drying when he made them out. "Help me." The words looked rough, desperate, the kind of scrawl left by someone with shaking hands. For a moment, his fear gave way to pity. Someone had been here before him, trapped, like he was now. The realization that this wasn't just his nightmare but part of something bigger made his stomach churn. The fog stirred behind him. He spun, raising the iron, his breath catching in his throat. Just beyond the reach of the lantern's glow, something shifted between the trees. Not the figure from the gas station, this one was lower to the ground, moving with sharp, jerky motions like an animal. He caught the faint glint of eyes, reflecting the lantern light for the briefest second before vanishing again. His body went rigid, the forest suddenly alive with invisible watchers. The whistle cut through the air again, but this time it didn't circle him, it came directly from behind the chair. Daniel's heart dropped. Slowly, shakily, he took a step back, his foot snapping a twig that echoed like a gunshot in the silence. The whistle stopped. A long pause followed, thick and suffocating. Then came the sound of breathing, harsh and labored, rising from the very spot where the chair stood empty. The lantern flickered, its flame sputtering, and in that stuttering light, the chair wasn't empty anymore. A figure sat slumped in it now, its head bowed low, arms hanging lifelessly at its sides. Its clothes were ragged, soaked as if it had been pulled from water, and its long, wet hair clung to its face. Daniel's chest tightened, every muscle screaming to run, but his legs betrayed him, frozen to the ground as the figure slowly lifted its head to meet his gaze. His shoes pounding against damp earth, the tire iron still clutched in his hand. His chest burned, each gulp of air heavy with mist, but he didn't care. He had to get away from that clearing, away from that cursed chair. Branches clawed at his arms, slapping against his face as he pushed through the dense tree-line. The lantern glow vanished behind him, swallowed whole by the fog, but no relief came. The laughter followed, chasing him like an echo that grew sharper each time it returned. But he tried to keep straight, tried to convince himself there was a road or a house somewhere beyond the trees. But the deeper he went, the more the forest seemed to turn in on itself. Paths curved back into one another, trees leaned unnaturally, their shapes blending into walls of gray. At one point, he stumbled into another small clearing, and his stomach dropped. The same chair stood there, waiting. The same lantern swayed above it, glowing faintly. It was as if he had never left. No, 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 Daniel whispered, stumbling back. His chest heaved with panic as he circled the space, desperate to prove it wasn't the same place. But every detail was identical, down to the carving on the seat. He reached out, touching the wood with trembling fingers. The words were still there, "Help me." His heart sank. The forest wasn't real, not in any normal sense. It was folding in on itself, trapping him in a loop. The whistle pierced the fog again, louder than ever, and this time it was answered. Another whistle, fainter but just as deliberate, echoed back from deeper in the trees. Daniel froze. There wasn't one of them. There were two. The sound played like a twisted duet, weaving back and forth, circling him from opposite sides. His vision swam, every instinct screaming that he was prey being toyed with. He tightened his grip on the iron until it bit into his palm, refusing to collapse even as his knees threatened to buckle. The lantern flickered wildly, its flame straining as though smothered by the fog. Shadows stretched across the clearing, and in those fleeting flashes of darkness, Daniel saw them, two tall figures standing at the tree line, heads tilted in opposite directions, bodies impossibly still. They didn't move closer. They didn't have to. Their whistles carried the promise of patience. They weren't hunting to kill. They were hunting to play. Daniel staggered backward from the broken frame, his pulse hammering in his throat. The chorus of voices grew louder, overlapping until they dissolved into a distorted roar. His own terrified face stared back at him from the other photographs along the hallway, dozens of frozen reflections. He clutched at the wall, fighting to steady himself, when the void behind the shattered frame began to shift. The blackness rippled, like water disturbed by a stone. At first, it was only an impression, a darker shadow forming in the endless dark. Then, piece by piece, it began to take shape. A hand emerged first, pale and skeletal, fingers too long, nails blackened and sharp. It gripped the edge of the broken frame, pulling forward with a strength that made the wood groan. The rest followed, a shoulder, a hollow face, skin stretched tight as parchment. Its eyes glowed faintly, not with light, but with an emptiness that made Daniel's stomach twist. He stumbled backward, colliding with the opposite wall. The figure dragged itself through the broken frame with an awful, deliberate slowness, its movements jerky, as though it had to fight against the barrier of reality itself. With each inch it gained, the air grew colder, and the whispers cut off into suffocating silence. Only the creak of its joints and the scrape of its nails on wood remained. Daniel could barely breathe. He wanted to run, but the hallway had shrunk around him, narrower, darker, the doors sealed tight. The house wanted him here. It wanted him to watch. The creature finally pulled free, standing hunched in the corridor. Its head tilted unnaturally to one side, as though studying him. Then, slowly, its mouth opened, wider and wider, until the skin at its jaw cracked. From its throat came a sound not its own, but his, Daniel's own voice screaming, echoing the very cry he had made moments ago. The mimicry was exact, down to the tremor of fear. His legs nearly gave out beneath him. For the first time since entering the house, Daniel broke into raw, desperate pleading. "Please, please, I don't belong here." His voice shook, but the figure only stepped closer, dragging one long nail along the wall, leaving behind a deep gouge. The photographs rattled in their frames, dust sifting down from the ceiling. The air pressed against him, urging him back, hurting him deeper into the house. And though every fiber of him resisted, Daniel realized he was no longer in control of his path. The house was guiding him toward something, toward the heart of whatever lived here. Daniel's knees shook beneath him as the burlap-headed figure raised its lantern higher, the light spilling across the rows of occupied chairs. The slumped bodies didn't stir, but the weight of their silent witness made him feel smaller, weaker. The words carved into the wood, "Wait, sit, run, be quiet," seared into his mind like instructions for a game he'd never agreed to play. He realized with dawning horror that every choice he'd made tonight had already been part of the rules. Even leaving the car. Even stepping into the woods, the figure stepped closer, its lanky frame swaying unnaturally as if bones bent beneath its skin. "Sit," it rasped, gesturing to one of the empty chairs near the front. Its voice was not a command but a verdict, the kind of tone that brooked no refusal. Daniel backed away, clutching the tire iron tighter, shaking his head. "No," he whispered, his throat dry. "I'm not part of this." His words sounded pitiful against the vast, suffocating silence of the forest. The whistle returned, sharper now, cutting through the fog like a blade. The two other figures emerged from the tree lean, flanking him, their heads tilted, their long hands twitching with anticipation. The game was closing in. Daniel's heart thundered. He could submit, sit in the chair, and wait for whatever came next, or he could try something no one else had dared. His grip tightened on the tire iron, sweat slicking the handle. For the first time since this nightmare began, he stopped running. He let out a roar, raw and desperate, and swung the iron at the lantern in the overseer's hand. The glass shattered, flames spilling out in a burst of sparks. The burlap figure staggered back with a guttural shriek, its sway breaking into spasms as the light died. The other two whistlers faltered, their duet collapsing into discordant, pained screeches. In the chaos, Daniel ran, not toward the woods, not back to the car, but straight through the rows of chairs, weaving between the slumped bodies until the fog thinned and the night air changed. When he stumbled back onto the highway, his lungs burning, the world felt solid again. The gas station was gone, swallowed by the night. Only the hum of distant crickets and the faint glow of stars above remained. He collapsed to his knees, trembling, tire iron still in hand. For the first time, silence was his ally. And yet, as he rose and staggered toward the faint lights of civilization, one thought clawed at him: the rules of the game had never said he could win. Only that he could run, for now. Somewhere behind him, faint and mocking, a whistle carried on the wind.